My name is Marianne Porter. I'm 68 years old. That morning had begun quietly, the way most of my mornings do now. The kettle whistled on the stove while sunlight crept across the kitchen tiles. The magnolia tree outside the window was already heavy with blossoms, and the air through the screen smelled faintly of salt and jasmine. I had planned to spend the day organizing old lesson plans from my years at the high school papers that no one but me would ever read again. Then the doorbell rang once. Sharp, impatient. When I opened the door, my daughter stood there with her hair unbrushed and a manila envelope clutched to her chest. Brooke didn't say hello. She brushed past me into the living room, her perfume sharp enough to sting my eyes. "Mom, I need you to sign something. Right now." Her voice was brittle, thinner than I remembered. She dropped the envelope on the coffee table papers, spilling across it like fallen cards. I could see a bank logo at the top of one sheet. "Good morning to you too," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "What is this? Just sign, please. I don't have time to explain." She handed me a pen, tapping the line where my name should go. I read the first sentence, and the words hit me harder than her knock at the door authorization to transfer full account ownership to Brooke Porter Hale. I looked up slowly. "Brooke, this is my savings account. All of it." "Yes, I need access for a business investment, but the bank won't let me move the funds unless your name's off. It's just paperwork, Mom. Then I'll go with you to the bank and talk to them directly." "No, I just need you to sign." Her voice cracked into a shout. Something inside me went cold. I had seen my daughter angry before teenage arguments, wedding stress. The time she and Sarah fought over selling their house. But this was different. Her eyes were wild. Her cheeks flushed as if she hadn't slept in days. "Brooke," I said quietly, "you're scaring me." "Scaring you?" She gave a short, humorless laugh. "You're the one ruining everything. Do you think I'd be here begging if it wasn't serious?" I folded my hands together to keep them from trembling. "You're my daughter, and I'll help you. But I won't sign anything I don't understand." The room fell still for half a second. Then she stepped closer, her breath hot and uneven. "Sign it," she whispered, "or I'll hit you harder." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. The words didn't make sense in her mouth. My child who once wrote me Mother's Day poems who cried over injured animals. But then her hand flashed upward, and the back of it met my face with a sound that cracked through the room. Pain bloomed behind my cheekbone. The taste of iron filled my mouth. I stumbled backward, one hand catching the edge of the armchair. "Brooke, sign it!" she screamed, voice shaking. "You owe me this!" I saw the reflection of us in the glass cabinet, her face twisted with rage, mine pale with disbelief. Blood ran from my nose onto the front of my blouse. I pressed my palm against it not to stop the bleeding, but because I couldn't bear to look at her. "I don't know what's happened to you," I said softly. Her eyes flickered just once, and for a heartbeat I thought I saw the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. Then it was gone. She grabbed the papers, crumpled them into the envelope, and stormed out. The door slammed so hard the window panes rattled. The house fell into silence except for the hum of the refrigerator and the steady drip of blood onto the tile. I walked to the kitchen sink, rinsed my face, and held a towel against the swelling. My reflection in the window was almost unrecognizable, an old woman with a bruise already darkening across her cheek. Outside, a pair of tourists walked past on the street, their laughter floating through the open window. For a moment I envied their simplicity, the lightness of their morning. I sat down at the table, folded the towel neatly, and stared at the cup of coffee I'd poured earlier. The steam had vanished. The magnolia tree swayed gently in the wind petals, dropping one by one onto the porch. That was how I stayed for a long time motionless, listening to the slow ticking of the clock until my phone vibrated on the counter. The caller ID read First Southern Bank. I picked it up, heart pounding. "This is Marianne Porter," I said. The voice on the other end was polite, professional, and urgent. "Mrs. Porter, we need to confirm whether you authorized a transfer request at 3 o'clock this morning." And just like that, I knew the worst was only beginning. The morning light came through the blinds like a pale blade. My cheek had turned the color of spoiled fruit, and every movement sent a pulse of pain through my jaw. I'd barely slept. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Brooke's face, the fury, the tremor in her hands, the sound of the slap. I made myself a cup of coffee, though the smell of it made my stomach twist. Tiger, my old tabby, brushed against my ankle, confused by the quiet. The house still carried the faint echo of last night, like an argument that refused to leave. At 8:15, the phone rang again, the same number as before. "Mrs. Porter." The voice was calm, female, businesslike. "This is Linda Graham from First Southern Bank. I'm calling about a security alert on your savings account." My grip tightened on the phone. "What kind of alert?" "At 3:04 a.m., someone attempted a full transfer of your account funds, $118,400, to another institution under a different name. The request was flagged because of irregular signatures and inconsistent identification numbers." I sank into the chair, pressing a hand against my chest. "You're saying someone tried to take all of it?" "Yes, ma'am. Our system automatically blocked the transfer, but the person insisted it was authorized. They presented photocopies of your ID Social Security card and a signed form. We need to confirm whether you initiated this transaction." I could hear my pulse in my ears. "No," I whispered. "I didn't. I've never authorized anyone." Linda hesitated. "We thought as much. The signature didn't match. But whoever did this had precise details: your address, your account number, even your security questions." The room tilted slightly. "Do you know who it was?" "I'm afraid we can't release that information over the phone, but our security officer can meet with you today to file a fraud report. Would 11 o'clock work?" "Yes," I said, though my voice sounded far away. "I'll be there." When I hung up, I stayed still for a long time, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence again. My hands were shaking, but not from pain. There was something colder behind it recognition. This wasn't a moment of rage, a slap in anger. It was a plan. I thought of the papers Brooke had shoved in my face, the way her eyes darted when I read them. She hadn't come to ask for help. She'd come to finish what she'd already begun. I walked through the living room slowly, seeing it differently now. The open drawers, the missing photograph from the mantel, the faint scent of her perfume still clinging to the air. Every detail felt like evidence. On the coffee table lay a small drop of dried blood I hadn't noticed before. I wiped it away with the corner of a tissue and felt an odd calm settle in. At 11 sharp, I drove downtown to the bank. The sun was bright, but I wore sunglasses anyway, partly to hide the bruise, partly to keep from meeting anyone's eyes. Inside, the air smelled of paper and disinfectant. Linda Graham, the woman from the phone, met me near the teller line, tall, well-groomed with the kind of sympathy that comes from practice. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Porter," she said gently, leading me into a small glass office. "We'll do everything we can to protect your funds. You'll need to verify your identity and sign a formal complaint so our fraud department can escalate the case." She handed me a folder with copies of the forged documents. I stared at the signature printed in thick blue ink. It was mine, or close enough to fool most eyes. Underneath the scribbled signature, the handwriting spelled out, "Brooke Porter Hale." Something inside me clenched. The proof was no longer emotional or circumstantial. It was ink and paper. It was real. Linda's voice faded as she explained procedures, deadlines, federal claims. I nodded, signed where she pointed, and thanked her for her time. When I stepped back into the heat of King Street, Charleston's air felt heavier than usual. The world outside went on as if nothing had changed. Tourists taking photos, church bells chiming noon. Yet everything inside me had shifted. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was someone who had to learn at 68 how to defend herself from her own blood. Back home, I locked the door and slid the bolt twice. The sound echoed through the house like a verdict. Then I sat at the kitchen table, again opened my notebook, and wrote down the time of the call, the name of the banker, the details of the attempt. If my daughter wanted a war over my life savings, I would make sure I had every record of the battle she started. That evening, the house felt hollow, like a stage after the actors had gone home. I made soup, but couldn't eat it. The spoon clinked against the bowl, and that small sound filled the kitchen in place of conversation. When the sun began to set, I walked through each room, not to tidy, but to see what was left of my life. The first thing I noticed was the drawer in the hallway dresser, the one where I kept little things that mattered only to me. It didn't slide open smoothly anymore. When I pulled harder, the wood creaked, and a cold draft of memory seemed to come with it. Inside the velvet box that once held my mother's pearls was empty. The chain of them, creamy white, a wedding gift from 1949, was gone. I lifted the lid and felt the faint outline they had left in the lining. The dust clung to my fingertips like guilt. In the same drawer, my husband's navy ring should have been wrapped in a handkerchief. He'd worn it through 2 tours overseas. I had planned to give it to Brooke one day when I felt she was ready to value what it meant. Now the handkerchief lay flat, folded perfectly, but the weight inside it was gone. I looked closer at the brass keyhole. Around it, the wood was scarred, fine scratches where someone had forced it open. I leaned in, touching the grooves with my fingertip, and felt the sting rise behind my eyes. For months, I'd noticed small things, a missing silver spoon, a photo frame slightly moved the faint scent of perfume in the hallway, long after Brooke's visits. I'd told myself it was forgetfulness. Now it was proof. I sat on the edge of the hallway chair and tried to remember the last time Brooke had laughed, really laughed. It had been more than a year ago after her birthday dinner. She'd held that same pearl necklace up to the light, calling it old-fashioned, but elegant. The memory turned sour now. I closed the drawer slower this time and turned the key until it clicked. The house was quiet again, but it no longer felt like mine. Through the window, the Charleston sky glowed deep orange, fading into gray. I told myself I'd start making a list of what was missing, what was taken, and what I could never get back. The next morning, I was still sitting at the kitchen table when the doorbell rang again, softer this time, almost hesitant. Through the window, I saw a familiar shape, Nora Jacobs, her silver hair tied back, holding a paper bag from the bakery on East Bay. I hesitated before opening the door, pressing a hand to my bruised cheek. "Nora, I wasn't expecting you." "I know, honey," she said, stepping inside. "You didn't answer my call last night, so I thought I'd bring you something warm." She lifted the bag. "Cinnamon rolls, your favorite." The smell of sugar and butter filled the house, too gentle for how I felt. She set the bag on the counter and turned toward me, her eyes searching my face. "What happened?" "It's nothing," I said automatically, though I could tell by the way she frowned that it wasn't convincing. Nothing doesn't leave a mark like that. I exhaled, turning away to pour coffee. "Just a fall, Nora." She let it go, at least for the moment. We sat opposite each other the way we had for decades, same kitchen, same mugs, but everything felt off balance. Nora had been my neighbor since Brooke was 5. She was the kind of woman who always knew what was happening before the newspaper did, but her gossip had never been cruel. Until now, I wasn't sure if I feared her concern or her curiosity more. After a few minutes of small talk, she leaned forward, lowering her voice. Marianne, I don't mean to stir trouble, but have you spoken to Brooke lately? My hand froze on the cup. Why? There's talk, she said carefully. People downtown have seen her with a new crowd, rough types, and someone at the bank mentioned she's behind on her mortgage. She told folks she's working on a big real estate deal that she just needs a little time. I looked down at the steam rising from my cup. She said that Nora nodded regret, softening her tone. She's been asking around for loans, too. Said you were helping her. I didn't believe it, but I thought you should know. The shame came slowly, like a tide creeping over my feet. It wasn't only for what Brooke had done, but for what people now whispered in places I'd spent my life earning respect. The Porters had lived in this neighborhood for 40 years. I had taught half the children here, attended every church auction, every graduation. Now when people looked at me, they would see the mother of the woman who lied. I folded the napkin in front of me again and again until it tore. Thank you for telling me, I said quietly. Nora reached across the table, resting her hand over mine. You're not responsible for her choices, Marianne. Don't let anyone make you feel that way. Her kindness nearly undid me. I wanted to believe her, but the bruise on my face and the empty drawer upstairs said otherwise. After she left, the house filled with silence once more. I stood at the window watching her car pull away, and for the first time I realized how small my world had become. Even friendship now felt like another doorway through which shame could walk in uninvited. The cinnamon rolls sat untouched on the counter, the glaze cooling into glass. I thought of Brooke again, her promises, her easy smile, and wondered when exactly she had learned how to lie so beautifully. That night the rain came hard, sweeping across the porch in thin silver sheets. I sat in the living room with a blanket around my shoulders, pretending to read the newspaper, but not really seeing the words. Every creak of the old house sounded sharper than usual, as if the wind itself had learned how to listen. It must have been close to midnight when I heard the soft scrape at the front door. Not a knock, just a brief rustle, like paper brushing wood. I waited, holding my breath. When I finally stood and opened the door, the street outside was empty, the rain already easing into mist. Only a small envelope lay on the doormat, its edges wet and curling. Inside, on a single sheet of lined paper, someone had written in thick black ink, "You'll regret calling the bank." Underneath, a single initial B. I read it twice, then folded it carefully, though my hands were trembling. The handwriting was hers. Even through the fear, I could recognize the curve of the letters, the same loops she used to sign birthday cards. My daughter's anger had taken shape, no longer just a voice shouting in my living room, but something darker, colder. I called the police, speaking softly, as if she could still hear me through the walls. The officer on the other end sounded young, polite, detached. "It's probably a family misunderstanding, ma'am. We see this kind of thing all the time. I'll file a report, but unless there's a direct threat of violence, there's not much we can do. A letter that says I'll regret something isn't a threat, I asked." "Technically, no," he said. "Just hold on to it. If anything else happens, call us again." He hung up before I could answer. I set the phone down and stood for a long time staring at the letter on the table. Outside, the rain had stopped. The only sound was the ticking of the clock and the occasional drip from the roof into the garden below. I locked the door, slid the deadbolt, and closed every window in the house. The smell of wet magnolia drifted in from the porch before I shut it out. Then I placed the envelope inside a kitchen drawer next to the bank papers and the small notebook where I'd begun to record every detail, times, dates, phone calls, and now threats. The drawer closed with a soft click. I pressed my palm against it for a moment, feeling the faint tremor in my fingers. The air inside the house was still, but the quiet no longer comforted me. It felt like a pause before something heavier began to fall. The letter changed everything. For days, I moved through the house like a guest instead of its owner, checking the locks twice before bed, leaving lights on through the night. The creaks of the floorboards had new meanings now. Every sound might have been footsteps returning. On the third morning, I drove to the electronics store near the old market, a place I'd only ever gone for printer ink and batteries. The young clerk behind the counter wore a lanyard that read Michael. When I asked about home security, he smiled politely, then noticed the bruise still faint on my cheek. His smile faltered. "I just need something small," I told him. "Quiet. Nothing fancy." He showed me a row of small, wireless cameras, no bigger than a matchbox. "These run on motion sensors," he explained. "They record straight to a memory card. You can hide them almost anywhere." I nodded, pretending calm, and bought 4. As he bagged them, he said softly, "It's good to take precautions. People aren't always who they used to be." The words lingered long after I left the store. That afternoon, I placed the first camera behind a row of books on the living room shelf. It had a clear view of the front door. The second went above the kitchen window hidden by a curtain fold. The third in the hallway facing the bedrooms. The fourth I tucked inside a hollow porcelain vase on the mantel, angled toward the back door. By evening, my small house had become both safer and lonelier. The hum of technology filled the silence, a low electric pulse that seemed to breathe with me. I told myself this wasn't betrayal. It was survival. 2 nights passed quietly. The third night did not. It was near 1 a.m. when I woke to a faint clatter metal against wood. I lay still, listening. The sound came again, softer this time. Then silence. I waited, counting my heartbeat until it steadied. I didn't go downstairs. Instead, I kept my eyes on the dark ceiling until dawn. When morning came, I brewed coffee and sat in front of the small monitor linked to the cameras. My hands felt stiff as I pressed play. The first footage was uneventful, the cat pacing near the hallway headlights flickering through the blinds. Then at 12:47 a.m., the image shifted. The front door opened slowly. Brooke stepped inside. Her hair was tied back. She moved with careful familiarity, as if she'd done this before. Behind her came a man I'd never seen. He was tall, lean, with a tattoo creeping up the side of his neck. Dark lines shaped like thorns. Brooke whispered something to him, and he nodded, closing the door quietly. For a few seconds, they stood still. Then she led him down the hall. The footage jumped motion detection, catching fragments. His gloved hands opening drawers. Brooke pointing toward the cabinet near the stair. He bent to inspect the lock, then looked back at her. She hesitated, rubbed her face, then nodded. I pressed pause. It was enough. The sight of her standing in my hallway like a stranger directing another man to pry open the drawer where I once kept my wedding photos, it hollowed me. The bruise on my face had already faded, but this wound would not. I rewound the footage, watching again, slower this time. Brooke's movements were quick practiced. She didn't flinch when the man pocketed a small silver frame from the dresser. She didn't look back when she left. At 12:59, the door closed. I sat there for a long while after the screen went dark. My coffee had gone cold. I should have called the police, I know, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I saved the footage onto 2 memory cards, one for the bank folder, one for a fireproof box in my closet. Then I printed still frames of the man's face, of Brooke's hands, opening the drawer. By afternoon, I had taped one of the photos to the inside of my kitchen cabinet, not out of anger, but as proof of reality, so that when the doubt came again, I could look at it and remember that love could rot quietly for years before anyone noticed the smell. When evening fell, I sat on the porch as the Charleston sky turned purple over the harbor. The camera light blinked faintly through the window behind me, steady and cold. I used to think nothing could hurt more than losing my husband. I was wrong. Some kinds of loss keep breathing even after the door closes. 2 days passed before the phone rang again. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice that followed stopped my breath. Mrs. Hale. It's Sarah, Brooke's wife or ex-wife depending on which story you believed. I hadn't heard from her in over a year, not since the night she packed her car and left their townhouse in Mount Pleasant, with nothing but a suitcase and a hollow look in her eyes. Sarah, I said slowly, is everything all right? She hesitated. No, but I think it's time you knew what's really happening with Brooke. We agreed to meet that afternoon at a small cafe near the riverfront. She arrived wearing oversized sunglasses. Despite the cloudy sky, her blonde hair pulled into a low knot. When she removed the glasses, I saw the truth beneath them. Purple shadows under her eyes, the exhaustion of someone who had lived too long inside fear. Thank you for coming, she murmured, wrapping her hands around a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. I wasn't sure you'd even want to see me. I want to understand, I said. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she exhaled and began her voice trembling between anger and sorrow. After the miscarriage last year, Brooke changed. At first, I thought it was grief. We both were grieving, but she drowned in it. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping. I tried to get her to see a doctor. She said she didn't need therapy, just something to help her cope. Sarah paused, staring at the steam rising between us. That's how it started. The pills. Prescription painkillers from a friend at the clinic, then stronger ones. At first, she hid them, but soon it became obvious. She'd lose hours, whole nights, and wake up shaking. The words settled between us like ashes. She started selling things, Sarah continued. Jewelry, electronics, anything she could. Then she met Ricky Vargas. Said he could help her get her clean, manage her money, connect her with new clients. I didn't know what he really was until it was too late. Who is he? I asked quietly. Sarah looked at me as if she were afraid to speak the name aloud. A dealer. And worse. Ricky doesn't just sell drugs, he lends money to addicts who can't stop using. Brooke owes him $46,000. He's been threatening her for weeks. The number hit me like a punch. 46,000. She thought she could pay him off by flipping a property deal, but it fell apart. That's when she came to you. Sarah's eyes filled with tears she didn't bother to hide. When you said no, Ricky told her she had 24 hours before he'd come after both of you. That's why she snapped. She wasn't just desperate, she was terrified. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I thought of Brooke's trembling hands, the fury in her voice, the letter shoved under my door. And beneath all that, a fear that must have been devouring her from the inside. She's still using. Sarah nodded slowly. As far as I know, yes. She's disappeared these last few days. Ricky's men have been asking around and I'm scared he'll find her. Or you. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling the ache where love and horror lived side by side. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I tried, she whispered, but she warned me not to. She said if I called you, she'd never forgive me. We sat there in silence, the rain starting to fall against the window. Across the street, the river shimmered with the dull light of early evening. Finally, Sarah reached into her purse and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. That's Ricky's number. I don't know what you'll do with it, but if he finds her first, it won't end well. When she left, the chair across from me felt too empty. I sat staring at the paper, her handwriting looping in soft, frightened letters. The name Ricky Vargas stared back at me, black ink, bleeding into the napkin beneath it. The rain outside grew heavier, beating against the glass like a warning I didn't yet know how to obey. The next morning, I woke with a weight in my chest that coffee couldn't shake. Sarah's confession had turned every fear into something with a name, a face, a price tag. I couldn't save Brooke by pretending this was still a family problem. It was a crime now, and I needed help. By mid-morning, I found myself sitting across from a man whose office smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. Nicholas Reed had been a family attorney for nearly 30 years. He wore a dark suit, a gray beard trimmed with precision, and a look that saw through the polite tremble in my hands. "I read the summary you sent," he said, adjusting his glasses. "I'm sorry you're going through this, Mrs. Hale. What your daughter did isn't just financial coercion, it's criminal assault and attempted fraud." The words hit harder than I expected. Hearing them from someone else stripped away the last of my denial. "I don't want her in prison," I murmured. "I just want to be safe. I want my savings protected." He nodded slowly. "Then we start with protection. I'll transfer your funds to an escrowed account under my firm's oversight. Only you can authorize withdrawals in person. It'll take 48 hours to complete, but it's secure." He leaned forward. "You also need documentation. Every threat, every visit, every letter. The footage you mentioned could be critical." I slid the memory card across the table. "It shows her breaking in with a man named Ricky Vargas." Nicholas frowned. "That name's familiar." He tapped a few keys on his laptop, scrolling through something on his screen. "There are multiple ongoing investigations involving him drug trafficking, extortion, loan sharking. He's been on the DEA's radar for years." The word extortion made my stomach twist. He reached for his phone. "I'll connect you with someone I trust, Detective Maria Sanchez from the Organized Crime Division. She's thorough, discreet, and knows how to navigate cases like this." 2 hours later, I met her in a small office at the Charleston precinct. Detective Sanchez was in her 40s, calm but alert, her brown hair pulled into a tight bun. She listened without interrupting as I explained everything the night Brooke hit me, the forged documents, the letter, the footage, Sarah's confession. When I finished, she said quietly, "Mrs. Hale, you're dealing with more than a desperate daughter. Vargas's operation thrives on people like her, those who start with debt and end up trapped. If he's involved, you're both in danger." She spread a folder on the desk and began outlining a plan. "We'll set up surveillance at your home, but we'll also use this footage as leverage. If Brooke or Vargas contacts you again, record everything. Don't confront them. We're preparing a sting." A sting. The word sounded foreign in my mouth. "Controlled engagement," she clarified. "If Vargas thinks there's money left to collect, he'll surface. We'll be ready." Nicholas joined us later that afternoon to finalize the paperwork. Between his measured legal calm and Sanchez's quiet determination, the chaos around me began to form a fragile shape, something like control. That evening, after returning home, I gathered every trace of Brooke I could find. Old photos, school awards, a crumpled Mother's Day card she'd made in kindergarten. I placed them in a small box and set it on the shelf beside the security monitor. It wasn't bitterness that guided me, it was clarity. Love. I was learning could no longer mean surrender. When the phone rang again just before dusk, I froze. The voice on the other end was deep, male, unfamiliar. "Mrs. Hale," he said. "Brooke tells me you're holding on to money that belongs to her. Let's not make this ugly." The line went silent. I didn't reply. I simply hit record. Then, with shaking hands, I called Detective Sanchez. By the time the sun went down, a plan was already in motion, quiet, deliberate, and dangerous. I stood at the window as blue lights flickered faintly in the distance. Somewhere out there, my daughter was falling faster than I could catch her. and this time the only way to save her might be by letting her face the fall. Detective Sanchez's plan was simple, at least on paper. Leave just enough temptation for them to reach, not too much, not too little. They'll come for what they think is still there, she'd said. Let them. We'll be watching. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, counting out the cash. $20,000, all the money I could bear to leave exposed without risking everything. The rest had already been transferred into the secured account Nicholas Reed set up, locked behind code signatures and 2 forms of ID. But this small sum, placed carefully inside my old filing drawer, would be bait. I folded the bills into neat stacks, slipped them inside a manila envelope, and placed it under a few folders labeled Insurance and Property Deeds. Then I positioned a camera above the cabinet, not hidden this time, but subtle enough that only someone looking directly for it would notice. By evening, the house was still. The air felt heavy with expectation. I sat on the couch with the TV muted, pretending to read, while Detective Sanchez's unmarked car waited 2 streets away. The plan depended on one thing: patience. And patience had never felt so much like fear. Just before midnight, I heard the faint rattle of the back door. My breath caught. The lock clicked. Once, twice, and then the door eased open. I didn't move. The monitor on the coffee table came to life with a dull glow. The footage showed Brooke stepping into the kitchen, flashlight in hand. Behind her came the tattooed man, Ricky Vargas, the same face burned into my mind from the photo I'd printed days earlier. He moved with confidence, not like a thief, but like someone collecting a debt. "Check the drawer," he whispered. Brooke's voice shook. "It's here. I told you she'd leave it." "Count it," he said. She hesitated, looking toward the stairs toward me, though she couldn't know I was awake. "She's not supposed to be home." Vargas smirked. "Doesn't matter. You want your problem gone? Then stop whining and count." The sound of paper rustling filled the tiny speaker beside the monitor. Brooke pulled out the envelope, her fingers trembling as she flipped through the bills. "It's 20, she said softly. "That's not enough," Vargas snapped. "You said she had over 100 grand. "She moved the rest," Brooke whispered. "Her lawyer locked it up." Vargas's expression darkened. He stepped closer, gripping her arm. "Then you better find a way to fix it. Tonight's the deadline, sweetheart. I don't care if it's your mother I get paid." She pulled free, her voice cracking. "I told you I'd get it. Just give me until morning. You said that yesterday." He took a step closer to the camera's line of sight, his face sharp and cold under the kitchen light. "You've got till sunrise. After that, she pays another way." Brooke looked up at him, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Don't touch her. Please. I'll fix it." He didn't answer. He just pocketed the envelope and turned toward the back door. She lingered a moment longer, glancing around the kitchen, like a child lost in her own home. Then she followed him out into the darkness. When the door closed, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. My hands were shaking so violently I had to press them against the table to steady them. I waited 10 more minutes before calling Detective Sanchez. My voice barely rose above a whisper. "They came," I said. "It's all on the footage." By the time dawn colored the horizon over Charleston, 2 patrol cars were parked discreetly at the corner engines, idling. The recording had captured everything: the threats, the names, the time. It was no longer my word against Brooks. It was evidence painful, undeniable, and final. I sat by the window as the light grew stronger, my reflection ghosted against the glass. For the first time since this began, I wasn't afraid. I was waiting. The call came just after noon. I was slicing fruit in the kitchen, trying to keep my hands busy, while Detective Sanchez and her team reviewed last night's footage from the cameras. The phone vibrated against the counter, and when I saw Brooke's name flash across the screen, the world seemed to tilt. I answered before I could think. Mom. Her voice came through breathless, ragged. Meet me at the wharf tonight. 7 o'clock. Bring cash, whatever's left. Brooke. Where are you? Are you safe? Just do it, she hissed. Don't call anyone. Don't make this worse than it already is. The line went dead before I could say another word. Detective Sanchez looked up from her notes, already guessing who it was. That was her, wasn't it? I nodded. The wharf. She said 7. Sanchez leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing in thought. They'll try to collect again. Vargas must have realized the bait wasn't enough. I have to go, I said quietly. If I don't show they might hurt him, you won't go alone, she replied. And you won't go unprepared. By 5, the sky had turned the color of pewter, and the wind carried the smell of salt and diesel from the harbor. Sanchez met me at the station with a plain envelope and a small device, no bigger than a button. It's a microphone, she explained, clipping it to the inside of my jacket. We'll be monitoring from a van nearby. If things escalate, we move in. She looked me in the eyes, her tone softening. Marianne, whatever happens, stay calm. Don't provoke him. Don't protect her if she tries to defend him. We need her words on record, too. I nodded, though every part of me trembled. I just want her alive. At 7 sharp, I parked near the edge of the Charleston Marina. The water below the dock slapped against the pilings, dark and restless. The old warehouses loomed behind me, their windows glowing faintly in the last light. Brooke was already there, standing near the end of the wharf, her hair whipping across her face. She looked thinner than I remembered, the bones of her wrists sharp beneath her sleeves. When she turned toward me, I saw a flicker of something, relief, shame, maybe both. Mom, she whispered, her voice breaking. You came. Before I could answer, a figure stepped out from behind one of the pylons. Ricky Vargas. The tattoo on his neck glinted in the light from the harbor lamps. He moved like he owned the space between us. Well, look who showed up, he said. Mrs. Hale, you've been hard to reach. I steadied my voice. You've taken enough from us. I brought what's left. He smirked. Not good enough last time. Maybe you're smarter today. I handed him the envelope Sanchez had prepared, a mix of real and marked bills. His fingers brushed mine briefly, cold and impersonal. He opened the flap, counted a few stacks, and glanced toward Brooke. You didn't tell me your mother had fight in her, he said. That little act at the bank impressive. Most people her age just hand it over. Brooke's face went pale. Ricky, please, just take it and go. He ignored her. You think you can play both sides. Mrs. Hale. Move your money. Call the cops, then show up here like a hero. I didn't call anyone. I lied. Meeting his eyes. I just want this to end. For a moment, he studied me. The gulls cried overhead, sharp and distant. Then he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. You're lying. Behind him, Brooke's hands were shaking. Ricky, stop. She's telling the truth. Just take it. He turned on her, grabbing her wrist hard enough to make her gasp. You shut up! You brought me here for this, didn't you? To watch her beg? I forced myself not to flinch. She's not part of this anymore. You have the money. Leave her out of it. He looked back at me, amusement flickering across his face. You really think I'd walk away from a family that rich in secrets? You've still got more stashed away, don't you? I said nothing. Silence, Sanchez had told me, was often the loudest truth. He smiled. That's what I thought. The wind whipped harder across the water. A horn sounded from a passing ferry echoing through the docks. I shifted slightly, turning my shoulder toward him, the signal Sanchez had drilled into me if things went wrong. Vargas noticed the movement and tilted his head, suspicion tightening his features. "What's that?" Then faintly I heard the distant shuffle of boots on wood, the officers closing in. He reached for Brooke's arm again, but she pulled free, crying out, "Ricky, don't!" Before he could react, voices rang out from the shadows, police hands where we can see them. The floodlights snapped on blinding white against the dark. Vargas froze for half a second, then tried to run, but the officers were already on him. The sound of struggle echoed across the wharf, shouting metal, clanging handcuffs, snapping shut. I stood frozen, my heart pounding as Sanchez appeared beside me, her hand steady on my shoulder. "It's over," she said softly. But it wasn't. Brooke stood a few feet away, her face streaked with tears, her body shaking. She looked at me like a child again, lost and terrified. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking under the weight of everything we'd just survived. "What have I done?" The harbor wind carried her words into the night, and all I could do was stand there watching the police lead Vargas away and my daughter collapse under the silence that followed. The floodlights came alive like a second sunrise, bleaching every shadow from the wharf. For a heartbeat, everything froze: the wind, the gulls, even the water beneath us. Then chaos erupted. Detective Sanchez's voice cut through the noise. "Move in, secure the pier." From the corners of the dock, unmarked vehicles flashed red and blue, their beams slicing through the mist. I barely had time to process what was happening before the air filled with shouts, heavy boots pounding the wood, the metallic clatter of guns being drawn. Vargas spun toward me, his face twisting with fury. "You set me up," he hissed. I didn't answer. My fingers found the small emergency trigger in my jacket pocket, the one Sanchez had told me to use if things spiraled. I pressed it once, firm and final. The tiny vibration against my thumb was the signal that it had gone through. Then everything broke loose. Two of Vargas's men emerged from behind the crates stacked near the pier's edge, both pulling handguns. Before they could lift them, officers were already shouting commands. "Drop your weapons down." The first man hesitated, and a single flash of light split the air. A warning shot, not fatal, but enough to knock him to the ground. The second threw his gun into the water hands, trembling above his head. Vargas cursed, spinning around like a trapped animal, his tattooed neck glistening with sweat under the floodlight. "Ricky Vargas, you're under arrest for extortion, assault, and possession of illegal substances," Sanchez called out, stepping forward with her badge raised. He laughed bitterly. "You think this changes anything? There'll be 10 more of me tomorrow." Her expression didn't flicker. Not tonight. Two officers moved in from behind, pinning his arms, cuffing him as he shouted curses that broke into incoherent rage. His voice carried down the wharf, echoing over the water, until it disappeared into the hum of police radios. Brooke stood a few feet from me, shaking uncontrollably. She looked smaller than she ever had, her shoulders hunched, her face streaked with tears and salt. "Mom," she whispered, her voice raw. I thought it was just money. I didn't know it would go this far." I turned toward her, but my body wouldn't move closer. Something inside me, the instinct to comfort, to forgive, stirred and stopped short. The officers surrounded us, some collecting evidence, others pulling Vargas's men toward the vans. Detective Sanchez crouched beside me, checking the small microphone still clipped inside my coat. "It worked perfectly," she said quietly. "Everything we needed is on record. You did well." I didn't feel like I'd done well. My hands were still shaking, and my throat felt dry as sand. I looked at the envelope on the ground, its edges torn open. bills scattered across the pier like fallen leaves. Money, the catalyst for all of it, now meaningless. One officer approached Sanchez, his voice brisk. "Ma'am, we recovered narcotics and cash from Vargas's car. Confirmed prints on the envelope match both him and the daughter." Brooke gasped. "No, I didn't. He made me touch it." Sanchez didn't answer. She simply nodded to the officer, then turned back to me. "She'll need to make a statement. You both will, but not tonight. You've done enough." I looked at Brooke still kneeling on the dock. Her makeup had streaked into dark lines, her eyes hollow. She wasn't defiant anymore or angry. She was just broken, like someone who had finally run out of lies strong enough to hold herself up. The paramedics arrived soon after checking her pulse, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. I stood beside them in silence. "Will she go to jail?" I asked. Sanchez hesitated. "That depends on what she tells us. But she'll be safe tonight. We'll place her under protective custody until Vargas's network is fully dismantled. He's already facing federal charges. She may be a witness, not just a suspect." I nodded slowly, though the words barely registered. The adrenaline that had kept me upright was fading, replaced by a hollow ache that reached bone deep. Brooke looked up at me, eyes full of something I couldn't name. "I'm sorry," she said. The words came out small, as if they'd been hiding somewhere inside her for years. For a long time, I said nothing. There was no right answer, no comfort that could fit inside that space between us. I only reached out, touching her hand, gently, cold against my skin, trembling. Sanchez signaled to the officers to begin clearing the scene. The floodlights dimmed one by one, leaving the dock bathed again in the gray light of dawn. Seagulls had begun to gather near the edge, circling the quiet water that reflected the first streaks of morning. As Vargas was led away in handcuffs, he turned once, his voice low, but sharp enough to reach us. "Family's the easiest weapon, Mrs. Hale. You'll see." I didn't respond. The officers shoved him toward the waiting car, his threats dissolving into the sound of the engine. The wharf emptied slowly. Evidence bags sealed, radios clicking, engines starting. Only Brooke and I remained sitting side by side on the damp wooden boards. The sea air carried the faint scent of oil and salt. My daughter's head fell against my shoulder, her sobs quiet but relentless. And for the first time in months, I let myself cry too, not out of fear or anger, but because justice had finally arrived, and it sounded too much like grief. Chapter 12. The Hospital Room. The next time I saw Brooke, she wasn't standing on a pier or crying under police lights. She was lying in a hospital bed at St. Anne, Frances, her body pale against the thin white sheets. Tubes ran from her arm, her breath shallow but steady. A nurse told me she was detoxing under supervision and that the process would be difficult. "She's stable," the nurse said softly, "but she doesn't want visitors yet." I stood by the doorway anyway, just long enough to see her chest rise and fall. Even through the glass, she looked so young, as if all the rage and chaos had burned away to reveal the frightened girl she once was. For a moment, my hand lifted toward the door handle. But then I remembered everything, the bruise, the letter, the look in her eyes the night she hit me, and I let my hand fall. Detective Sanchez found me later in the hallway, a folder in her hand. "The paperwork's ready," she said. "Once you sign the official complaint, the charges move forward. It's your decision." We sat in a small consultation room, fluorescent light buzzing above us. My hand trembled as I took the pen. The words "Plaintiff Marianne Hale" blurred for a second, then cleared. I signed slowly, pressing hard enough for the ink to bleed through the paper. When I finished, Sanchez reached across the table. "You did the right thing." Maybe I did. Or maybe I was just doing what was left to be done. As I left the hospital, The wind carried the faint smell of rain through the parking lot. Behind me in that quiet white room, my daughter slept through the storm her choices had made while I walked into the one mine had become. A week after signing the complaint, the calls began. First from my sister in North Carolina, then from women at the church, each one carrying the same quiet plea disguised as concern. "She's still your daughter, Marianne," they said. "Families survive worse. Maybe it's time to forgive." I listened, politely nodding when the pauses came, but the words sank into me like stones dropped into still water. Everyone meant well, I knew that, but none of them had stood in my kitchen with blood on their shirt or listened to their child threaten them for money. Love wasn't the same after that. It changed shape, became something quieter, heavier, like a duty that refused to die. By Sunday, I decided to host a small dinner. Nothing grand, just stew cornbread and the apple pie recipe Brooke used to help me make every fall. I told myself it was a way to bring normalcy back. But as I set the table, I realized I was testing something deeper, whether peace could exist beside an absence. The house smelled of cinnamon and slow-cooked onions, the kind of warmth that once made our family whole. I laid out 6 plates, polished silverware, folded napkins. When I reached the 7th chair, hers, I stopped. For a long moment, I just stared at it. The seat was clean, the cushions still faintly indented from years of Sunday dinners. My hand brushed the wood, tracing the scratches she'd made as a child, carving her initials when she thought I wasn't looking. Guests began to arrive, Nora from next door, my sister Evelyn, 2 old church friends. Conversation drifted easily at first, like polite music. No one mentioned Brooke's name, though her silence filled the space between every sentence. Midway through the meal, Evelyn's eyes flicked to the empty chair. "You could invite her next time," she said gently, "just to talk." I smiled, not unkindly. Maybe someday. Later, when the dishes were cleared and the candles burned low, I stayed at the table alone. The chair remained across from me untouched. I poured one last cup of tea and whispered into the quiet, "Love doesn't mean surrender." Outside, the wind rustled the magnolia branches against the window. Inside, the air felt lighter, as if the house itself understood what I hadn't for so long, that love could stay even when trust could not. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and rain. Outside, Charleston's spring light pressed through the tall windows, but inside, everything felt muted, as though time itself had slowed for what was about to happen. I sat in the 2nd row, hands clasped in my lap, while the clerk called my daughter's name. Brooke Hale, charged with assault, attempted fraud, and aiding in criminal activity. The words were clinical, but they cut just the same. Brooke stood beside her attorney, pale beneath the harsh lights. She had gained a little weight since the hospital, her hair tied back neatly, her hands folded tight to keep them from shaking. When the judge asked for her plea, her voice was clear, but small. "Guilty." "Your Honor." A low murmur rippled through the room. I felt something inside me shift, not relief, not grief, just the quiet recognition that this was the point of no return. The prosecutor spoke briefly, recounting the evidence, the recordings, the forged papers the night at the wharf. Then Brooke's attorney stood and read a statement she'd written. "My client accepts full responsibility for her actions. She has cooperated with law enforcement, provided testimony on Ricky Vargas's operations, and has entered a rehabilitation program under federal supervision." The judge, an older man with kind eyes, but a voice like gravel, leaned forward. "Ms. Hale, the court acknowledges your cooperation and the extraordinary circumstances surrounding your case. However, consequences remain. You are sentenced to 18 months in a rehabilitation custody program. If completed successfully, your record will reflect both your conviction and your recovery efforts." Brooke nodded once. Her lips trembled, but she didn't cry. I wondered if she'd used up all her tears. Then the judge turned toward me. "Mrs. Hale," he said gently, "your courage to report this case has not gone unnoticed. Many parents would have stayed silent out of fear or shame. Your decision not only protected yourself, but may have saved your daughter's life." For a moment, the entire courtroom blurred. I wanted to disappear, to shrink into the wooden bench. Courage, they called it. But courage felt too clean a word for what this was, the bitter ache of watching justice delivered to someone you once rocked to sleep. When the bailiff led Brooke away, she glanced over her shoulder just once. Our eyes met a brief flicker of something that might have been gratitude or maybe just exhaustion. I didn't wave. I only sat still as the gavel struck the sound, echoing like a closing door. Outside, the day had brightened. People passed by the courthouse steps, laughing, carrying umbrellas against the light drizzle. I stood beneath the awning for a long time, breathing in the damp air. Justice had come as promised. But standing there, I understood what no verdict could fix, that some forms of love survive only as memory tender and irretrievable, like sunlight through glass you can no longer touch. The first letter came a month after the sentencing. The envelope was plain, postmarked from a rehabilitation center 2 hours outside Charleston. Inside, Brooke's handwriting, once bold and hurried, was smaller now, more deliberate, as if each word had been weighed before it was allowed to exist. Mom. They say writing helps. I don't know if you'll read this, but I need to try. I think about that night every day. The look on your face, the things I said. I was sick and stupid and cruel. I'm trying to understand why I let it happen. I read it once, then folded it carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. My hands trembled, not with anger, but something closer to exhaustion. I didn't reply. I couldn't yet. The next letter came in June, then another in July. Each one carried the same rhythm apologies that tripped over themselves. Confessions written in looping ink. Moments of hope that almost sounded like the daughter I used to know. She wrote about group therapy, the women she met there, the counselor who reminded her of her father. She said she was learning how to live without numbing the pain. Sometimes she asked questions. Do you still keep the cat? Did you sell the house? Do you ever think of me before I became someone else? I never answered, but I kept every letter. I placed them neatly in the bottom drawer of my writing desk, inside a folder, marked pending. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it wasn't rejection, either. Every few weeks I would take the folder out and reread one of the letters, tracing the faint indentations her pen had left in the paper. The words felt like fragile bridges stretched across a river neither of us was ready to cross. Outside, life went on, the garden blooming again, the porch light repaired the house growing quiet in ways that no longer felt empty. Still, when the mail truck stopped at the corner, each month I found myself waiting at the window, caught between dread and longing. It wasn't love I feared losing. It was the possibility of it finding me again. 18 months passed quietly, marked not by dates, but by seasons. The magnolias bloomed twice, the porch paint peeled and was redone, and still the drawer labeled pending stayed closed. Life had steadied itself into small, manageable rituals. Coffee at dawn evening walks by the river letters. I no longer expected, but secretly missed. Then one morning, an official envelope arrived from the rehabilitation center. Inside was a single line typed neatly on state letterhead, Ms. Brooke Hale has requested a supervised visit. For a long time, I just stared at the paper. My first instinct was to refuse. But beneath the fear was a quiet sense of obligation, not born of guilt, but of something older, something maternal that refused to die, no matter how much it had been tested. A week later, I drove to the center. The building was gray and clean, surrounded by trimmed hedges and the hum of security gates. Inside, a counselor named Mr. Collins met me with kind eyes and a practiced calm. "She's in a good place," he said gently. "You'll see." The visiting room was bright but sterile, divided by thick glass. Brooke was already there, sitting on the other side, hands folded neatly in her lap. She was thinner than before, her skin clear, her eyes steady. Sobriety had changed her face. It wasn't youth that had returned, but a kind of clarity. When she saw me, she smiled hesitantly. "Hi, Mom." The word trembled slightly, but it didn't break. I picked up the phone on my side of the glass. "Hello, Brooke." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "You were right not to help me. Your no saved my life." I didn't expect the tears that followed hers first, then mine. "I hate what I did," she continued. "But every time I wanted to give up, I thought about the way you looked at me that night. Not angry, just done. I never wanted to see that look again." I pressed my hand to the glass. She mirrored it. The barrier between us was cold, but her palm was steady. We talked until the counselor signaled our time was up, about the garden, about therapy, about what came next. When she stood to leave, she turned back once more. "Can I write again?" she asked. "Yes," I said softly. "You can." And when she walked away, the glass still separating us, I realized it wasn't forgiveness that had brought me there. It was the quiet hope that one day, maybe forgiveness would no longer be needed. The evening came soft and gold over Charleston, the kind of twilight that blurred everything it touched. The air carried the scent of salt and jasmine, and the faint hum of the harbor drifted up from the water like a memory. It was the kind of night my husband used to love, the quiet hour, when the world began to settle, when the porch light clicked on and the day finally exhaled. I stood on the steps, the same worn boards he'd repaired himself the summer before he passed. The house behind me had grown still, its walls no longer echoing with anger or fear. There were marks that would never fade, a dent on the banister, a hairline crack on the kitchen door, but they belonged now to a life survived, not a wound left open. The last letter from Brooke had arrived 2 weeks earlier. The handwriting was steadier this time, confident even. She wrote that she'd completed her program and was working part-time at a community center near the rehab facility, helping new arrivals find their footing. She didn't ask to come home. She just thanked me for not saving her too soon. I had read that letter 3 times before folding it into the drawer marked pending. But this time, instead of closing it, I left the drawer open. The folder no longer felt like a wound sealed away. It felt like a small archive of grace proof that silence, when kept with care, can still hold love. The harbor wind lifted brushing strands of gray hair across my face. I stepped to the edge of the porch, fingers finding the old switch by the door. My husband had wired it himself 40 years ago, back when we first moved into this house. Every light should have a purpose, he'd said. A reason to shine. The bulb flickered once, then steadied, casting a soft glow across the yard. I watched it spread over the fence, touching the flowers by the walkway, and the gate that creaked just like it always had. For years, I'd turned this light on as a signal for my husband to find his way home from work for Brooke, when she was late from curfew for Hope, when everything else felt lost. But now, as the light warmed the evening air, I understood it differently. "This light isn't for waiting anymore," I whispered. "It's for peace." The harbor lights shimmered in the distance, boats rocking gently against the tide. Somewhere out there, I imagined Brooke walking along another street under another sky, seeing her own kind of light, and knowing she could stand in it without fear. Inside the house, breathed quietly, not empty, just calm. I turned from the porch, leaving the door slightly open, the glow spilling softly across the threshold. For the first time in a long while, I didn't look back. The light stayed on.